Good morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate. It's probably going to be afternoon by the time we're done this video, and I would like to read the next 5 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission today. And those are numbers 21 through 25. And I was right. We are switching sections right before I'm done. This is going to be fun because we'll get there. All right, so maximizing my lovely, lovely document, which is very lovely. All right, call to action number 21. We call upon the federal government to provide sustainable funding for existing and new Aboriginal healing centers to address the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual harms caused by residential schools, and to ensure that the funding of healing centers in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories is a priority. Okay, maximize my camera. All right, so bit of background. Long before any settlers got here, and by the way, the term settler is not meant to be offensive when an Indigenous person uses the term colonizer on you. That is meant to basically point out where you are not checking your privilege. This does not apply just to white people. This applies to anyone who is not native to this continent, whose family is not native to this continent. So despite the fact that I was born here, in a non-pejorative sense, I would be called a settler because both of my parents are white and both are of European descent. My father was born in America, but he would still be a settler even though he's first generation American. Both of his parents came directly from Europe. My mom's family has been here for several more generations than that, but her family is also European, right? Which is why I'm white to begin with. So that's not meant as a pejorative. But the whole thing about healthcare, we are still under the category of health, is that, as I explained yesterday, there is a highly uneven distribution of resources between the settlers and the Indigenous people on this continent. But before we got here, to go back to the point I was attempting to make, the Indigenous people of this continent had their own healing methods and had spiritual, physical, intellectual practices that are completely foreign to our understanding of medicine. And yes, the scientific method is very, very important, but it is among Indigenous beliefs. I was taught this in university. I don't know whether this is ubiquitous between the nations, but it is among their beliefs that there is a plant on Earth that is capable of healing every ailment the human body can have. I don't mean one single plant for every ailment. I mean a separate plant for every ailment, right? So, for example, you know those melatonin pills that you can get to help you relax and fall asleep? Melatonin is natural to the human body, but melatonin can also be found in many plants and substances that can be found on the earth. And to be fair, even under the Western scientific model, by which I mean the scientific model that is practiced in the medical world, which, as I say, is a good thing. But we need to recognize that even under this model, we are taking every resource we have for healing from the earth. Everything we have comes from the earth. This water bottle, with its twisty top and its removable straw, this is all plastic, okay? Plastic is one of the most unnatural things that you can possibly have, so waste not, want not, please. But even plastic had to come initially from the earth. And it is among the Indigenous understandings that the closer you get to the original natural element, and I will use that unironically here, probably the better. You know, iron gives you energy. You need iron in your blood to have energy throughout the day. People who are anemic, and I have a history of anemia in my family, not hugely so, but it can get iffy. People who are anemic have no energy. Iron is a actual element on the periodic table, which is why I say I use that unironically. You can find iron in a lot of different plants. So, spinach, kale, all of the dark leafy greens, that sort of thing. But generally, the point here is that they have a more basic, by which I mean fundamental, and natural understanding of how medicine can work. And that worked for them for thousands of years before we got here. So while the scientific method is extraordinarily important, especially when it came to, say, the development of the COVID-19 vaccination, get your shots, people, get your shots, thank you! It's also very important for us to recognize where we need to take a step back and let people heal in the way that is most comfortable to them within their cultural context, and not presume that we have the best and only method. All right? So basically, with that, that would be an example of checking our privilege at the door and saying, okay, if it works for you, let's be pragmatic and not have to stick our finger into that pie. Next, maximizing document. Boo, boo, boo. I know I get pedantic, by the way, but as I say, it's important to take that step back. Scrolling down. Boo, boo, boo. Number 22. We call upon those who can effect change within the Canadian healthcare system to recognize the value of Aboriginal healing practices and use them in the treatment of Aboriginal patients in collaboration with Aboriginal healers and elders, where requested by Aboriginal patients. Okay, so to my understanding, this would refer to an Indigenous patient being treated off reserve. And this makes sense to me because, as I say, I know someone who is in non-emergency medical transit, and he gets people from off of the Oneida Nation Reserve quite often in his truck. And they have, as I outlined before, they have their own healing methods, but for some things, it's definitely not going to work. And yesterday I offered the example of dialysis. You can't do that if you don't have a medical facility at hand. And when you go off reserve, therefore, it's difficult as it stands now to get people to work with you who understand where you are coming from culturally and who understand that you and your culture have your own forms of healing. So if the medical teams could work in collaboration, in combination with people who do understand the traditional way of doing things, which, by the way, the traditional way for Indigenous people can be very much more holistic than the Western model of medicine, because the Western model, and I hate to sound unscientific here, but it sort of looks at the problem rather than the root of the problem, whereas a more holistic view of medicine takes the perspective that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I'm all for that if it works. I have my own medical issues, okay, from top to bottom. Name a major organ, fun game to play at parties, and I'll tell you what's wrong with mine. Right? So I understand the piecemeal nature of medical science. I do. But when you don't take the psyche of the person into account as well, I believe that you're doing them a disservice. And a lot of the time, what can cause, without a background physical symptom, a worsening of your suffering is what's going on up here in your mind. And I've experienced this myself, trust me. When you're laying in the hospital, you've been there for over a month, and you're still in crazy amounts of pain, you can either take a Percocet or you can attempt to calm yourself down. If/when that doesn't work, yes, take the Percocet, for goodness sake. like, again, I'm being pragmatic here. Do what you have to do in order to get stuff done. But it would be, I think, a better service to the person as a whole individual to take into account their psyche before you dive in with full-blown narcotic medical intervention, in the case that I just brought up of being in a terrible amount of pain. So, start from the inside and work your way out, pretty much, would be the model I would recommend, but only if it works and only to the extent that it works. I'm not here to say that Western medicine is a bad idea, by which I mean, mainstream scientific medicine is a bad idea. It's not. We need it, and we have survived much longer as a species because of it. I mean, one of the primary human drives is that of motivation to get better. And we have much better medicine now than we did before. And by before, I mean even 50 years ago. There are huge advances in medical science. I think I've heard that medical science doubles its knowledge in the span of 10 years. So every 10 years, we have twice as much knowledge as we did 10 years ago. And that's going to continue, and I like that. So as I say, the traditional method, good, and use it when and where applicable, and to the extent to which it is applicable, and to which it is helpful. But like I say, start from the inside out, if that works. Because I don't want to throw either system under the bus. I'm trying to play both sides here right now, and I don't know how well that's working. Oh boy. It's only because I have so much experience in the medical field myself. Experience as a patient, not as a doctor. Okay. Some of you might know my medical history. I'm not sure. But next, if this thing would go away. Please go away. You're making me look unprofessional. Whoever said you were professional? Thank you. Oi. Number 23. We call upon all levels of government to 1. Increase the number of Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field. Yes, my God. The uneven distribution problem I'm talking about here again. And I chose to back away from the screen before I started yelling. See, we're all learning. Number 2, ensure the retention of Aboriginal healthcare providers in Aboriginal communities. So, same thing, only reverse. Keep them on reserve to help the people who are on reserve. But also the first one saying, let them work in the mainstream, please. These are intelligent people if you give them the chance to exercise their intellect. Jeez. And number 3, provide cultural competency training for all healthcare professionals. All right, this is thankfully becoming more ubiquitous and more of a requirement. I am only a writing tutor, but even in my field, I have to take at the beginning of every new year sensitivity training for culture, for LGBTQ plus rights, and for disability rights. Good. And when I say have to take sensitivity training, yes, it is a job requirement, but it's also very helpful because you never know who, as a writing tutor, is going to walk in through your door. So you need to know how to be able to communicate openly and mindfully with the person who comes in. At my university, and I love this, we are very multicultural, so that is highly beneficial training to me, and especially when it comes to the English language learner students. Okay, the more well understood term is ESL, English as a Second Language. Not necessarily ESL, though. Could be the person's third or fourth language. You get people who are so highly intelligent that they can learn more than one language. Not me. Not my strong suit. So, as a broader umbrella term, we would say English language learners now, and I like that term better. Because, like I say, they could know more than just the one language. So, let's be inclusive here. But this also applies to cultural sensitivity training. And we would learn from a woman named Liz something. I can't remember her surname. But okay, her first name was Liz. And she teaches at the beginning of the year about Indigenous communities and basically just general cultural sensitivity when it comes to colonizers working with Indigenous people, and also understanding the varieties of the ways of life that can come into the center, and how our own cultural context will sort of determine our view of how we perceive, quote, them, right? And I don't believe in the us versus them narrative. Just it's useless. It's useless. We have to throw it out. Can we throw it out, please, within my lifetime? That'd be great. I know it's not going to be within my lifetime, but I don't think I could survive if I weren't an optimist. So, head in the clouds, feet on the ground. Love it. But yeah, cultural sensitivity training is extremely important because it also makes things more ubiquitous. And I believe that being able to both literally and figuratively see/interact with people of other cultures will lead to the minimization of racism and prejudice. Because the more you see a thing, the less afraid of that thing you become. And all isms, at least this is my philosophy, all negative isms come from a lack of understanding, which is driven by fear. And the less afraid you are, the more you're going to want to interact with the thing. So you're going to interact with the thing more and understand it more, and hence build up your own knowledge base. And this is the benefit of multiculturalism. Love it, love it, love it. Want more of it? Mwah, love it. Next. I could wax poetic about that for days. All right, number 24, and this is the last under the health heading. Number 24. We call upon medical and nursing schools in Canada to require all students to take a course dealing with Aboriginal health issues, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, and Indigenous teachings and practices. This will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. As a beginning level operation, I would say that the cultural sensitivity training that I take at the beginning of every year, that's good for a foundation, but in accordance with this call to action, not going far enough. I mean, we have maybe an hour of this training for the entire year. And I fully believe that it should be more immersive, it should be more widespread, and it should be, like, to some degree all the time. I don't mean someone, breathing down your neck and saying, you better keep your sensors up, you better keep your eyes open, you better watch yourself, check yourself before you wreck yourself, that kind of thing. I don't want someone breathing down other people's neck about it. What I want is for people to allow these other contexts into their mind, into their heart, for as cheesy as that sounds, but to realize basically that you are not the default. I don't care who you are. I speak to literally everyone when I say this, but especially to settlers. You are not the default. And the quicker we recognize that because I'm included in that one, are not the default, the quicker we realize that there is no default, A, and B, the quicker we get on with things in opening our perspective up to people who we see as other, right? The us versus them narrative, we have to break this down. And the only way to do that is through understanding. So yes, that involves training. Yes, that involves letting others into our sphere, but not only into our physical space, but also into our cognitive space. That's incredibly important to realize on both the intellectual and emotional level. That's the more important of the two, that you are not the default, nor do you have the right to believe that you are. Because not only is it actually untrue, but it's morally to say that if I'm the default, then I deserve XYZ as opposed to those people who don't. That to me is morally bankrupt. So yeah, it's very important that we continue to open up our sectors, that we continue to open up our cultures for intercommunication between multiple people groups. Really important. Can you tell I'm a leftist? I'm a leftist. Can you tell? Yeah, I can. 2 thumbs up. Love it. All right. We are now going to move into what's probably going to be my weakest section in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is going to probably end up being embarrassingly bad. I had to do a little bit of research just on this very first one, but please, anyone who sees this, for the love of the gods, help me, because I'm going to start floundering. All right, under the heading of justice, and this will be our last for today, number 25. We call upon the federal government to establish a written policy that reaffirms the independence of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Sorry, I've got to scroll. Reaffirms the independence of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to investigate crimes in which the government has its own interest as a potential or real party in civil litigation. Okay. Had to look this one up. Civil litigation is basically a non-criminal case between two people, all right? So if one party decides not to press charges, basically is how I understand this. I know I am wrong, please help me. But the whole idea is between party A and party B. Party B has wronged Party A, but Party A doesn't want to take it to court, okay? This is civil litigation. As I say, it's usually between two people, but it could be between a person and the government, all right? That is going to be a very, very difficult fight. For context, okay, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, for any non-Canadian in my audience, the RCMP are our federal police. So basically it's the same as, like, I don't know, in America, who do you have? The Navy SEALs? Is that your federal police over there? But there are federal police, which means that they can go between nations. So, for example, Oneida Nation, pretty close to here, it's in Ontario, okay? The RCMP could go between Ontario and Oneida Nation, which is considered sort of a nation within a nation, okay? Because it's on Canadian territory. But really, only, as far as I'm aware, only the federal government has jurisdiction there. So the RCMP need to be able to travel independently between Ontario and, say, Oneida Territory, okay, in order to resolve conflicts between two separate parties. When one of those parties is the government, they're probably going to have some kind of financial interest going into any form of litigation against, well, anyone, quite frankly, but especially people on the reserve who already tend to be, this is not a blanket statement, but tend to be poor or poorer, okay? Oneida Nation is not a very nice place to be, or so I have heard. It's very beautiful out there. I've been out there, but I've never actually been on the reserve. I've just been in, on the land around it, sort of. It's gorgeous, but example of place that doesn't have clean running water, you know you're poorly off when, right? But okay, what I interpret this one as saying is that the RCMP needs to be permitted to operate independently of the government. As I say, they are our federal police, which means that they are basically a government agency and they are subject to government laws and rules and basically anything the higher ups want them to get done. But at the same time, what I believe this one is asking is for them to be a neutral party between civil disputes, like in civil disputes between the government and anyone living on reserve. So it could be the entirety of the reserve itself, not just like a particular individual. But basically, how I understand civil litigation is that if it is a non criminal thing, one party is not trying to take the other party to court, but one party might be trying to take the other party to task in some way. So, as I see it, you would need a neutral to move back and forth between party A and party B in order to make sure that both are playing by the rules. In this case, the government has substantially more power, by which I mean the government of Canada, not the government on Oneida Nation, just as an example for a nation, okay? Like I say. But especially the federal government in Canada. If the RCMP is getting involved, then yeah, it's probably the feds. And they've got a lot of power because they run the whole country, right? So, as I say, what I think this one is asking for is a neutral party to play for both sides to make sure that the both is operating by the rules laid down by the other. And I think that that is a much more fair and equal treatment of both sides. Like, y'all know I'm an anarchist. If the government is trying to overstep its power, it needs to be knocked down a peg or two or three or four, you know? And if it takes federal police to get that done, it takes federal police to get that done. I imagine that this is one of the ones that has not been implemented. And I would be willing to put money on that because only I think 6 of the 94 calls to action have been implemented. But before I put money down officially, I would want to look into that, which I'm going to do for the last video in this series. I'm going to address the ones that have actually been put in place and the ones that have been fully addressed. As I go through this, I do see some that have been partially addressed at least, but definitely not all the way there. So, okay, because I am clearly ignorant on this matter, I'm going to ask for help from anyone from the Indigenous communities who sees this. Help me out on this one because I do not do law very well. It is among the most boring subjects to me, but that's just me. But it's also incredibly important when it comes to nation relationships. So, yeah, anyone who can help me, please help me. I'm asking nicely. Please, thank you, and I love you. Okay. So, that is calls to action numbers 21 through 25. And kind of ending on a bum note here, but I will see you all tomorrow for numbers 26 through 30. Hopefully that will be interesting because we're staying under the heading of justice and I am out of my depth. Oh my gosh. And I don't know how to swim, either in the literal or figurative senses. All right. Talk to y'all tomorrow. Bye.